What happens when the owner of a warehouse chain offers to help carry boxes, and the worker snaps at him to mind his own business? That question burned in Walter Briggs' mind as he zipped up the navy blue hoodie. The fabric itched slightly around the neckline, but it helped finish the disguise. Scruffy beard, thick-rimmed glasses, jeans with a knee tear, and an ID badge reading Eric New Hire. Years ago, Walter had bought the struggling logistics company from a retiring founder. 18 locations up and down the West Coast, specializing in bulk storage and shipping for small businesses. He'd modernized the tech, streamlined the contracts, and tripled the client base. From the corner office, everything looked like it was running smooth. But last week, something stuck with him. A customer review buried in a long spreadsheet mentioned a worker crying in the loading bay after being yelled at by a manager. No names, no details, but it hit him harder than he expected. He didn't want to send another email or schedule another Zoom review. He wanted to feel the floor under his boots again. That's how he ended up outside the Stockton warehouse at 6:43 a.m., standing among a group of warehouse workers stretching and sipping coffee from thermoses. No one knew him here, he'd never visited this location, and the site manager had been hired by the district lead after Walter stopped doing in-person interviews. The warehouse had a steel skeleton and concrete walls. Huge, cold, and loud. Forklifts beeped in the distance as pallets rumbled across the floors. "Hey, new guy!" A tall man with a clipboard called out, clearly annoyed. "You're late by 13 minutes. Walter glanced at the clock. "It's 6:43, shift starts at 7. "I said what I said." He didn't even look up. "Name? Eric. Whatever. Go talk to Marissa by Dock 2. She's your trainer this week." Walter found her near a stack of flattened boxes. She was in her 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing worn boots and a ponytail under her cap. Her hands were covered in tape residue, and her eyes had the kind of tired that didn't come from just one bad night. "You the new guy?" she asked, glancing at his badge. "Yeah, Eric." "All right, grab gloves. We're moving inventory B12 to the outgoing dock. It's a long haul." Walter got to it. Over the next few hours, he kept his head down and worked. Marissa was fast, efficient, and patient. She explained everything, corrected him when he stacked things wrong, and even shared a protein bar with him at break. She worked like someone who couldn't afford to stop. Around noon, Walter noticed an older man struggling with a dolly stacked with boxes. He looked to be in his 50s, one arm in a wrist brace, trying to maneuver the load toward a truck. Walter walked over. "Hey, let me give you a hand with that." The man froze. "You knew?" "Yeah." "Then mind your own business. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." Walter blinked. "I just saw you struggling, figured two people could." I said, "Back off. You ain't here to make me look bad." That drew attention. Marissa, who'd been nearby, stepped in. "Ralph, come on. He's just trying to help." "I don't need help from some temp trying to score brownie points." Walter stepped back, stunned. "All right." Marissa looked embarrassed. "Sorry about him. He's been like that lately." "Is that normal here?" Walter asked quietly. She sighed. "No. But no one says anything. Not unless you want your hours cut." That night, Walter sat in his car and stared at the steering wheel. He had always told himself his people came first, that this company was different. But here, fear ruled. Help was seen as weakness. And the managers? Nowhere. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the employee list. Ralph had been working there for over 20 years. But Marissa? Only 11 months. Barely hanging on to her job and still doing it better than most. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Something was broken here, and he was going to find out just how deep it went. Walter returned to the warehouse the next morning. His back sore from the previous day's labor. He'd expected the physical toll. What he hadn't expected was how much heavier the emotional weight would be watching people push through exhaustion while leadership hovered somewhere invisible. He clocked in 7 minutes early. This time, no one mentioned it. Marissa was already taping up boxes when he approached. Her eyes were focused, and she barely glanced up. "You good with stacking today?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Cool. You'll be on the west aisle with me. They're short-staffed again." "How short?" She shrugged. "Just us and Patrick, maybe. Depends if they pull him to loading again." The west aisle spanned nearly half the warehouse, and the three of them were expected to cover everything from labeling to processing outgoing goods. Walter spent most of the morning sprinting between pallets, trying to keep up. Marissa never asked for help, but she also never let anything sit for long. Patrick, a soft-spoken man in his 40s, barely said a word, but his consistency made him reliable. At one point, Walter noticed Marissa wincing as she lifted a crate. She didn't complain, but her left wrist trembled slightly as she lowered the box. "You all right?" "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Just a strain. You want to switch tasks for a bit?" She gave him a look like he'd asked her to sprout wings. "If I slow down, it just piles up. We've got no floaters." "I'll deal." Walter didn't press, but he started watching closer. She wasn't the only one pushing past limits. Patrick took only half his break and returned to the floor early. A younger employee on the far side of the building worked through lunch entirely. At 2 o'clock, the floor supervisor, a man named Burke, finally showed up. He was tall, mid-30s, fit like he did CrossFit more than he worked here. His radio buzzed constantly, but he barely glanced at it. His sunglasses remained on even indoors. "Marissa," he called out as he passed. "You didn't finish re-banding those pallets yesterday." "They weren't wrapped when I got them," she said, not stopping her work. "Doesn't matter. They're in your zone." "They were already tagged, Burke. That's shipping's job. Don't split hairs with me. You want full hours next week or not?" Walter felt the air shift. Marissa didn't speak. She just nodded once and turned back to her tape gun. Burke walked off without another word. Walter stared after him. "That normal?" "She's not the only one he does it to," Patrick said softly. "He just knows she won't push back." "He always threaten hours?" Patrick didn't answer. He just picked up another box. Later, when they paused to rest near the emergency exit, Walter sat beside Marissa and asked, "Why stay?" She took a long sip from her water bottle. "Because I've got a little sister finishing community college. I help with her rent. And because places like this don't ask about your past." "What do you mean?" She looked over, eyebrows raised. "You ever try getting hired with a misdemeanor on your record?" Walter didn't respond. "Exactly," she said. By shift's end, Walter had a better view of the day's structure. The warehouse operated with skeleton crews, expected workers to multitask constantly, and had no real escalation process. Burke acted like he answered to no one, and the only HR contact listed on the bulletin board was a number that went straight to voicemail when Walter tested it. As he walked toward the exit, he passed a newer worker sitting on a stack of pallets, face down, breathing hard. She looked to be barely out of high school. "You all right?" he asked. She wiped at her eyes quickly. "I'm fine. Just dizzy. Didn't get to eat lunch." "Why not?" "They scheduled me straight through." Said no time. Walter felt something shift in his chest. He crouched down. "That's not okay." She gave him a wary look. "You knew?" "Yeah." "Then don't say that too loud. People who complain don't last." He stood slowly, heart thudding. That night, he drove back to his hotel and sat at the tiny desk, spreading out the notes he'd made. He wrote down every name, every incident, every moment that didn't sit right. Then he looked at the staffing chart. The Stockton location was supposed to have 32 employees on rotation. Only 19 were scheduled this week. 3 were out sick. 2 had quit in the past 10 days. He picked up the phone and called his executive assistant under a different name, asking her to pull the last 3 months of exit interviews and sick leave filings for that warehouse. She emailed them 20 minutes later. There were only 4 exit interviews on file. All 4 employees had simply written, "too much pressure" or "toxic management." None mentioned who they reported to. Sick leave requests were often denied or went unanswered. One woman had been written up for excessive absence after missing 2 days with a doctor's note. Walter leaned back in the stiff chair, staring at the ceiling. He'd built this company to be a place where hard work was rewarded. But here it was punished. Loyalty was used as leverage and silence was survival. The next morning, he arrived earlier than anyone else. He waited beside the supply shelf, pretending to check glove sizes. When Burke walked in, Walter approached him quietly. "Morning," Walter said. Burke looked at him like he was a fly. "You work the floor. Don't talk to me unless you're bleeding. You mind if I ask something?" Burke didn't respond. He just turned and walked off. That was all Walter needed. He stayed the full shift again, watching Burke float through the day without lifting anything heavier than a clipboard. He barked at a new hire for mislabeling a crate, even though no one had trained her. He ignored a spill near Dock 5 that caused a worker to slip, then told the guy to walk it off when he limped past. By 4 o'clock, Walter had seen enough. He stepped into the small break room, pulled out his phone, and made a single call to the regional director. "I want Burke off the floor immediately," he said. "As of today. Pull him. Full investigation. I'll handle the rest." The director didn't argue, just asked where Walter was. "I'm here," he said. "Front and center." 2 hours later, once the shift ended, Walter gathered the crew in the center of the warehouse. No one understood why. Marissa stood near the back, arms crossed. Patrick looked uncomfortable. Burke walked in late, chewing gum. Walter stepped forward and took off his ID badge. "My name isn't Eric," he said. "It's Walter Briggs. I own this company." Silence hit the room like a dropped pallet. Burke froze. "What the hell is this?" "You're done here," Walter said. "You've been intimidating staff, ignoring safety, and threatening hours as punishment. That ends now. You can't just..." Walter cut him off. "I can, and I just did. Leave." Burke's face reddened. He glanced at the crew, half expecting someone to defend him. No one did. He left without another word. Walter turned back to the workers. "I've been out of touch. That changes today." He looked directly at Marissa. "You've been holding this place together with grit and duct tape. That ends too. Starting tomorrow, you're lead floor trainer. With a raise." She didn't speak, just blinked twice and nodded once. Then he looked at the group. "No more threats. No more skipped meals. No more being ignored. Anyone who's got concerns, I'll be here all week. In person. Listening." The silence lingered, but something shifted. Not relief. Not yet. But the first breath after being held underwater too long. Walter knew this wasn't the end. It was the first correction in a long overdue course change. And for the first time in years, he felt like a leader again. The following morning, Walter arrived before sunrise again. This time walking through the front door without the hoodie, the fake ID badge, or the need to blend in. A few workers were already gathering in the break area, and conversations halted as soon as they saw him. He gave a brief nod and didn't linger. Today wasn't about speeches. Instead, he walked into the small office near the back of the warehouse. It had a single desk, a dusty printer, and filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in months. He placed his laptop on the chipped surface and opened a spreadsheet detailing every active employee at the Stockton location: names, schedules, pay rates, incident reports, and overtime hours. The numbers painted a story more damning than anything he'd seen on the floor. Some employees were regularly logging over 50 hours a week without formal approval. Others had unexplained schedule gaps, entire shifts they'd supposedly worked but weren't paid for. Several names had been removed from the active roster without paperwork to justify it. One in particular stood out, a woman named Denise Carter. She'd been listed as full-time until just 5 weeks ago, when her status abruptly changed to inactive voluntary resignation. He clicked on her file. No exit interview. No resignation letter. Just a note in the system. Left due to scheduling conflict. That note had been entered by Burke. Walter made another call, this time asking HR to track down a phone number for Denise. He didn't know what he was chasing yet, but he wasn't about to let it go unexplored. By the time the floor started buzzing, he'd already reviewed the prior month's payroll records and flagged 6 employees for underpayment. He stepped out of the office and approached the central aisle where Marissa had just finished organizing a fresh pallet. "You're good at this," he said, watching her double-check the barcode labels. "Ever train anyone formally?" She looked over, wary. "Not officially. I've helped a few temps, but no one sticks around long. You comfortable building out a training plan? Something repeatable? Depends if I get the time to make one." "You will." She nodded, but didn't say more. Walter appreciated that she wasn't interested in flattery, only results. He turned and made his way toward the receiving bay. A group of 3 workers stood near a broken pallet jack, trying to maneuver it around a damaged crate. One of them, a younger guy with buzzed hair and a sleeve tattoo, looked up as Walter approached. "You the owner, right?" Walter stopped. "Yeah." "Then you should know this jack's been busted for over a week. We've filed the form twice, but nothing happens." Walter crouched down and examined the wheel. The axle was bent inward, making it nearly impossible to steer straight. "Who's in charge of equipment maintenance?" he asked. "Supposed to be the night shift lead, but they've been short too. Half the time they just leave it for us to deal with." Walter stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "All right, that ends today. I'll get a replacement ordered now. In the meantime, don't use it again, it's a hazard." The worker gave a short nod and turned back to the crate without another word. Walter walked back inside, made the order, and updated the maintenance log himself. Then he printed new copies of the reporting process and stapled them to the notice board in the break room. Actual steps, not vague promises. By noon, he'd spoken to nearly every crew member on shift. He found Patrick near the far loading dock, working alone again. Walter approached slowly. "I noticed you've been covering a lot of ground," he said. Patrick didn't stop moving. "That's the job, right?" "Not alone, it isn't. We're short today again." Patrick gave a small shrug. "They said 2 people called out sick. No coverage." Walter frowned. "You ever been asked to do 2-person jobs by yourself before?" "All the time." "You ever report it?" Patrick looked up. "To who?" Walter held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. That afternoon, HR called him back. They'd reached Denise Carter. She was willing to meet in person. Walter arranged for her to come by the next morning. He didn't mention the meeting to anyone on site. As the shift wound down, he pulled the schedule for the next 2 weeks. The staffing gaps weren't just inconvenient, they were dangerous. Several critical roles had no backups assigned. If one more person quit, the entire delivery line would stall. So he called the district operations manager. "Pause all new client onboarding. Effective immediately. We're running this crew into the ground." The voice on the other end hesitated. "That'll cost us, Walter." "It's already costing us. You just haven't seen the bill yet." He hung up and went back to the floor. Marissa was finishing up near aisle C, carefully stacking excess supplies onto an upper rack. "Still here?" he asked. "Could say the same to you." "I've got a question for you," he said. "What's something here that nobody talks about but everyone knows is wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Sometimes Burke gave the better shifts to people who hung out with him after work. Guys mostly. One of them told me I should try being more friendly if I wanted the same treatment." Walter's jaw locked. "You report that?" She looked off to the side. "To who?" He took a breath. "That's changing." That night, he didn't go back to his hotel. He stayed in the office, reviewing every shift review Burke had submitted in the last 6 months. The patterns were clear. Male employees were more likely to be scheduled for premium hours and overtime. Female employees were more likely to receive performance warnings or be passed over for equipment certifications. It wasn't just favoritism. It was systemic. The next morning, Denise arrived. She was in her late 30s, dressed simply, and carried a manila folder with folded corners. Walter met her in the small side office. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure I would," she replied. "But HR said you were actually listening." "I am." She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, time-stamped schedule screenshots, and a formal complaint she'd filed that had never been acknowledged. "I asked for a shift adjustment after my son was diagnosed with epilepsy. Burke said he'd work with me, but instead he cut my hours completely. Then he told payroll I'd quit." Walter looked through the documents. "You didn't?" "No. I begged for part-time, even offered to move to night shifts." He stopped responding. Walter leaned back. "Can I make this right?" She looked tired. "That depends what you mean by right. I mean back pay, reinstatement if you want it, and a formal apology, not just from the company, from me." She didn't answer immediately. Then she nodded once. "All right." By the end of that day, Walter had reinstated Denise's employment with full benefits restored. He also contacted legal to begin a full audit of all personnel actions Burke had initiated. Every flagged incident would be reviewed by an independent team. Before he left the warehouse that evening, he gathered the crew again. No long speech. Just a few facts. Denise Carter is coming back. She should have never been forced out. That's on us. On me. A few heads turned. Marissa's expression didn't change, but her shoulders eased slightly. We're rewriting the shift structure. I've greenlit additional hires. And we're launching a real reporting system, anonymous if you want it. No retaliation. You have my word." He paused. "And if anyone ever tells you your hours depend on silence or friendliness, you come straight to me." No one clapped. No one cheered. But people listened. And that was enough for now. The warehouse felt different by the end of the week, but not fixed. Walter knew better than to expect a full turnaround in a matter of days. The air was still heavy with caution, but it was no longer weighed down by fear. People moved with purpose, not urgency. There was a difference, and he could feel it in the way they glanced at him, not with suspicion, but with expectation. He'd stayed at the Stockton location every day since the reveal, not as a figurehead but as an active set of hands. He helped reorganize the outdated safety signage, walked every aisle to log damaged equipment, and met with small groups of workers during staggered breaks to hear the issues that weren't obvious on the floor. The more he listened, the more he uncovered patterns that stretched beyond one toxic manager. Burke had been a symptom, not the source. The system had been allowed to drift slowly, quietly, until neglect had hardened into culture. And changing culture meant more than issuing policy memos. Mid-morning Friday, he pulled Marissa aside after she finished reviewing a mislabeled manifest. She looked more alert than she had earlier in the week, but the circles under her eyes were still there. "I need your help with something," Walter said. "If it's about training structure, I'm still drafting it. I just haven't had the bandwidth to put it into a doc yet. It's not that. I want to schedule one-on-ones with every employee next week, 15 minutes each. No formal reviews, just check-ins. But I don't want it to be a top-down thing. I want someone in the room who's earned their trust. She narrowed her eyes. You want me in the meetings? If you're willing. She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once. All right, but I'm not sugarcoating anything. I wouldn't ask you to. As they returned to the floor, Walter noticed a young woman near the freight lift struggling to balance a stack of outbound boxes. He recognized her from earlier in the week, the one who hadn't eaten lunch. Her name was Alondra. She had been tentative around him since the reveal, but she hadn't missed a single shift. He approached slowly. Need a second set of hands? No, I'm good, she said quickly, then hesitated. Actually, yeah, if you don't mind. They lifted the boxes together and set them onto the outbound cart. Her hands were steady, but her voice was quiet. I heard you're fixing the schedule stuff. That's the plan. It'll take time, but we've already started. She looked down at her gloves. I've only been here 3 weeks. I wasn't sure if anyone would even notice if I didn't come back. Well, I noticed, Walter said. And I hope you stay. She gave a short nod. That was enough. Later that afternoon, the replacement pallet jack arrived. Walter had it wheeled to the equipment bay, but instead of leaving it there, he called over 2 employees, Patrick and a man named Luis, and walked them through the process of tagging and logging it into the system. He wanted them to know it wasn't just about new tools, it was about who controlled access to them. You two are now point of contact for any future equipment issues, Walter said. Not to fix them, but to log them. If something goes unaddressed, I'll know. Luis scratched his chin. What if someone ignores us? Like, tells us it's not our call? Then they'll be corrected. Quickly. It was close to the end of shift when the regional HR rep, a woman named Marla, arrived. She'd driven down from the Sacramento office to follow up on the situation with Denise. Walter met her in the side office while the crew wrapped up their tasks. I reviewed the documents Denise brought, Marla said, setting her laptop on the desk. It's clear her status was changed without proper authorization. We'll be issuing retroactive pay for missed hours and adjusting her benefits accordingly. Good. And the complaint she filed that was never logged. Burke had overridden the submission. We're flagging his admin access across all locations. That should have never been possible. Walter leaned back. We need to audit every location with that same permission structure. If it happened here, it happened elsewhere. Marla nodded. Already in motion. As she packed up, Walter asked, You have the performance files from the last 6 months? She handed him a printout. Only one other employee had a pattern of complaints that never escalated. Name's Joel Winston. He was under Burke's supervision. Walter flipped through the sheets. Joel had 3 separate notes from co-workers alleging verbal harassment, including one instance where he'd reportedly mocked another worker's accent during a group meeting. None of it had been investigated. Is he still on staff? Yes. He's on the floor right now, packaging zone. Walter stood. Bring Marissa to the office. Now. 10 minutes later, Joel was sitting across from Walter. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes darted between Walter and Marissa. I'm told you've made some people uncomfortable, Walter said. Joel scoffed. This about those complaints? That's just people being soft. You can't joke anymore without someone crying foul. Marissa folded her arms. You told Alondra she should learn proper English before giving instructions. That's not a joke. Joel sat up straighter. She misunderstood. I was just saying she wasn't clear. Walter didn't blink. 3 separate reports, Joel. One from a driver, one from a temp, and now this. All consistent. Joel shifted in his chair. I've been here longer than most. I've trained half this floor. And that doesn't excuse a single word you said. We don't tolerate discrimination here. Not in tone, not in words, not in implication. Joel's jaw clenched. So what, you're firing me? Yes. Walter stood. Effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be processed by end of day. You'll be escorted out. Joel didn't speak again. He left without looking back. After he was gone, Marissa looked down at the desk. That should have happened a long time ago. I know. As the sun dipped low behind the warehouse roof, casting long shadows across the loading dock, Walter stepped outside and leaned against the metal railing. The crew was clocking out, some waving as they passed. Others looked too tired to do more than nod. He spotted Patrick walking toward the parking lot, toolbox in hand. Hey! Walter called out. Patrick turned. Yeah. Next week, I want to sit down with you. Talk through some process changes. Patrick raised an eyebrow. You want my input? I want your experience. There's a difference. After he left, Walter turned back toward the building. The Stockton warehouse wouldn't be fixed in a week, or even a month. But the rot had been cut out. The silence had been broken. That night, he drafted a letter addressed to every warehouse manager under his company's umbrella. It wasn't corporate boilerplate. It was a directive. From this point forward, all complaint channels would be rerouted through a third-party system with mandatory response tracking. No manager would have unilateral access to employee status changes. All shift assignments and overtime approvals would be logged, reviewed weekly, and made transparent to staff. And every warehouse would receive an unannounced leadership visit by him within the next 6 months. He signed it, scanned it, and uploaded it to the company portal. Not as a memo, but as a mandate. Then he sat back and exhaled. The company had grown bigger than he'd realized. But that didn't mean it had to grow colder. He'd let distance become indifference. Now he was closing that distance, one crew, one dock, one shift at a time. And this time he wouldn't be watching from a corner office. He'd be on the floor, where the real work happened, where the truth lived.